The importance of the foundational economy and its link to economic prosperity for Wales is clear. But how does this dovetail into the climate emergency, social enterprise, changes in procurement? What about our startup community? What does the future hold for organisations such as Business Wales? How realistic is Welsh independence? And of course, we've got a new Prime Minister, a new government. What will the Welsh Government be doing to build bridges and, of course, protect existing powers? To discuss this and more, I'm joined today by Deputy Minister for the Economy, Lee Waters. Hi, Lee.
Hiya.
So, lots of change ahead. The political landscape has changed significantly. Before we get into some topics around Wales specifically, what's your own thoughts, Lee, on the election results?
Well, I think we're in the middle of a significant change. I think this has been a watershed election. People have talked about 1983 as a parallel. Certainly, Labour's performance was worse than it was in 1983. And the radical government that we saw between 1983 onwards reshaped Wales. And I think, we could be in the similar situation now. Boris Johnson says he's going to deliver a Brexit bill by the end of January, take us out of Europe. If we haven't negotiated a new trade agreement with Europe in 12 months, which, by the way, never in the history of trade agreements has that happened, we will leave Europe without a deal. So he's going to legislate for that. So this is much more hard line, because if we leave Europe a year from now without a deal, that is going to be a calamity for the Welsh economy, which will make Margaret Thatcher's deindustrialisation of the 80s seem like a walk in the park. And that, I think, will have profound and far-reaching consequences for Wales and our economy. So this is a tumultuous time. We don't have all the details of what the government's going to do yet, but just on those contours alone, I think we're heading into a very difficult period.
How important is it that the Welsh Government builds strong relationships and certainly build bridges with the UK Government?
Well, it is important because, especially in terms of the economy is not devolved. The Welsh Government essentially has the grant-giving powers of the WDA, and now we have some additional modest tax-raising powers. But essentially, there is no such thing as the Welsh economy. There is a UK economy, and there are things that we in Wales can do, want to do, to try and direct that and to harness that. But the UK Government has responsibility for the economy in Wales, and not enough has been done to recognise the differences in different parts of the UK. And we had economic policy very largely driven by the needs of London and the South East and the City of London, and that's been true of the last Labour government too. So I'm not making a particularly partisan point. I'm making a point about the way the UK works, and it hasn't worked sufficiently well for the other bits of the UK economy. And we've seen certainly politically in the backlash from the north of England, north of Wales, because people don't feel the economy is working for them. And that's something the UK government absolutely has to focus on. I want us to have a cordial, grown-up, collaborative relationship with the UK government. I've been encouraged by the new Welsh Secretary, Simon Hart's initial comments about wanting to work with the Welsh government, wanting to make sure that the devolution settlement is respected, because we've heard a lot about respecting the Brexit referendum, far less about respecting the two devolution referendums we've had since 1997 and in 2001, where the very strong will of the people of Wales was to support and strengthen devolution, and it's important the Westminster government does that as we come out of Europe.
If you had that magic wand, you had an audience with the Prime Minister, what would you be saying?
Well, he needs to think beyond headlines and think about what it is that we want to achieve over the next 5 to 10 years, coming out of a union where we've been deeply entwined for 40 years is going to be traumatic. It is going to be complicated. It is going to take time. So we're going to get it done rhetoric works well as a campaign slogan. It works well as a doorstep, as we saw. I'm not sure that's a governing strategy. It's a campaign strategy. It's not a governing strategy. And I think we need now to calm heads about how we can unravel ourselves in a way that doesn't cause deep trauma. Not just for the economy, but also for the nature of the UK. Because we've seen Scotland is chomping at the bit for another independence referendum. I know we could have an unravelling of the union of the UK, which again would have significant implications for the way the economy works and for the fabric of our country. So there's lots of turmoil and instability in the system, and it needs to be handled in a considered and calm way. And this Prime Minister is not notorious for doing that so far, But he now needs to move out of election Boris into Prime Minister Boris.
A very contrasting result in Scotland. I think it's safe to say that the Scottish independence agenda isn't going to go away anytime soon. What about Wales? What's your own thoughts on independence?
Well, I think, when the polls have been interesting on Welsh independence, so there's definitely been an upsurge, especially amongst younger people. But when you give people a full range of choices, so do you want the same as now? Do you want less than now? Do you get rid of the assembly? Do you want extra powers? Do you want independence? Actually, once you give people the full palette of options, support for independence falls back to where it always was. But that, that's not going to stay like that if we have a traumatic exit from the EU and if Scotland leaves. Because if Scotland leaves the UK, then the Union, and there's talk of another border poll in Ireland, so it's entirely possible that Northern Ireland leaves as well. You're then left with England and Wales. And that's a very different scenario from the scenario we've been traditionally talking about. The Wales has been largely unionist. But the union it's been loyal to could well disappear from under our nose. So we may not choose to leave the union may choose to leave us. And where does that leave us? And I think under that scenario, support for Welsh independence could significantly increase.
Moving a bit closer to home in terms of the Welsh economy itself, what industries do you foresee really growing significantly over the next sort of 4 or 5 years?
Well, it's hard to say, isn't it? We're in a period of great turmoil, not just as I just described, in the upending of our trading relationships and our trading the way that we trade through the single market, which will have significant friction in the system. I've been speaking to industry leaders who essentially say their conversations with senior UK government figures, they've given up on the automotive industry, for example. They've accepted that a sacrifice of the political reality of needing to leave Europe is that we're going to sacrifice large industries. Now, I find that terrifying, the way that it's such a cynical and managerial way that's been decided, that we just give things up like that. So I don't think we should accept that. I think we should fight against that. But that does seem to me that the calculation has been made by the UK government, because industries that are highly dependent on frictionless trade, clearly their economic business models will fall apart if all of a sudden you're starting charging tariffs and you're having complicated cross-channel movements. So in terms of sort of growing industries, we could be seeing significant shrinkage of industries. And add on top of that, of course, the disruption of automation and the fourth industrial revolution. So, we're being hit by headwinds on all sides. So it's hard to discern a very clear way forward from that. But, let's not waste a crisis. We need to make the best of this as we can, certainly within AI and digitization, something I've taken a close interest in. I think there are opportunities that we need to seize, and I'm working within government on some things around that. The challenge for us on that is to move quickly enough, because it's a very fast-moving scene. But also, I think we need to make sure that we don't neglect the everyday as well. So we've been talking about our foundational economy approach, and that's about valuing and harnessing what's there. Because it may be, the days of large inward investments coming are not here in the near term.
On that note, before we go into that and specifically, for those listeners who perhaps hear the buzzword foundational economy, what does that mean?
Well, it's about the economy of the everyday. Okay, so we focused. The UK has focused a lot on the shiny and the new projects, fast growing, high productivity. Cutting edge project, and everybody wants a silver bullet. And the Welsh economy is particularly vulnerable to this. When you've had 100 years of economic decline, the chance to have large inward investment projects which quickly can shortcut economic development challenges are very attractive. Now, we know that the amount of investment being wanting to be made in the UK because of the uncertainty around Brexit just hasn't been there, so those projects haven't been around. But the problem in focusing on those projects is that we neglect what's already there. And that's what I mean by the economy of the everyday. So the things that are in... So I represent Llanelli in southwest Wales. Still got the residual engineering industries, still got some large manufacturers, foreign-owned. We've just lost Schiffler, but we've still got Gestamp, Calsonic, and we've got Trostre Tinplate Works owned by Tata. Now, those sort of firms, in a very uncertain, if we go for WTO rules type Brexit this time next year, those are the sort of firms that could well just decide to leave. We have anchor firms, they could up anchor. And our ability to stop that is limited. Now, clearly, we'll do everything we can to try and stop that. I don't want that to happen. We want to keep those valued employers in Wales. But while our eye is on that, our eye isn't on the ball of what's also there. Things that are always going to be there because there are people there. So things like energy, care, food, housing, things, so long as we have communities, they have everyday needs. And the economics of that, I don't think have been properly harnessed. So that's what the foundational economy is about. It's about nurturing the foundations of our economy. So Professor Carol Williams at Manchester Business School has been one of the lead thinkers on this, makes the point, and it's a slightly flippant point, but it speaks to a broader truth. We've got 3,000 people making steel in Port Talbot, and we spend a lot of attention and investment in keeping them there. There are as many people making soft furnishing in Wales and sofas. We don't have a soft furnishing strategy, because they're hidden away. They're on little industrial estates, but everybody's going to need a sofa. So, as I say, it's a flippant point, but there's a broader truth to it. There are things that we're always going to need that we're not doing enough to support, which I think could help speak to those communities who feel left behind and who feel the economy isn't working for them. And it's not just about having more of food producers or the mundane everyday economy stuff, the less glamorous stuff. It's not about having more of it, because economists can be very sniffy about it. They say it's low productivity, low wage, low value. We don't want more of that. We want the shiny and new. And I think it's not about saying we want more of what we've got. It's about changing the way that bit of the economy works, to create a culture of fair work, to create a culture of innovation in those residual, mundane, left behind, unglamorous parts of the economy. And that's the challenge of this agenda. It's to harness what we've got and to make it better as we do it.
So when you're talking about some of these major infrastructure projects, for example, I suppose historically they'll go to big suppliers for obvious reasons. Yeah. When we're talking about the foundational economy, we're talking about those big projects, making sure that the man on the street, if you like, is benefiting from those big investments. I'm guessing that comes down to procurement. Any specific changes that might be happening in that area?
So I think it's two things. It's about supporting grounded firms. Firms that are there, could be family firms, could be foreign-owned firms, but are rooted in an area, have been there a while and no plans to go anywhere. It's about valuing their role in our economy far more. I think that's really important. And recognising when we do go to look at procurement, that is supported. The power of the public purse is a very strong one. So we spend something like £6 billion a year in Wales on buying goods and services from public money in one way or another, and not enough of that is spent within our communities to support the foundational economy locally and those grounded firms, and that's what we want to change. So the foundational economy approach is about far more than procurement, but procurement is an important part of the story of how we bring about change. And we talk a lot about the example of what they've been able to do in Preston. Preston Borough Council, northwest of England, roughly the size of Swansea, modest powers as a borough council. They've managed to increase local spend up from 4% to 18% in a short period within European procurement rules through local leadership and know-how and helping what they call their local anchor institutions. So when you look at what they have there, and they're very similar to many towns within Wales, they have stuff there because the people are there aren't going anywhere. So the hospital, the council, the FE college, the sixth form college, they also have a university. And they've sat down with them and gone through their 200 biggest contracts and tried to say, well, how do we insure into the region some of these contracts? And they've had success. Now, it's not a panacea. It's not going to transform the Welsh economy, but it will make things better. So we want to use that approach working with the public service boards. So in Wales, we have these things called PSBs, Public Service Boards, set up under the Future Generations Act, which are statutory partnerships of the public sector in every local authority area. So it'll be things like the NHS, local council, Natural Resources Wales, a bunch of partners who have to come up with wellbeing plans for their areas. And these are powerful alliances that we need to work with to take the lessons of Preston, to take the lessons of the experimental funds that we're funding. We're funding 52 experimental projects that we've just recently agreed £4.5 million worth, to try different things in the way care works, to try different things in the way food purchasing and production works. We're trialling one really interesting one around based on the Sardinian model of a local currency, where local businesses trade with each other in credits rather than cash, so the money stays within the area. So we've got a variety of different things that we're trying. Some of them will fail, some of them will be successful, and the challenge is, just as with learning the lessons of the Preston work on procurement, how do we spot the successes in those experimental funds and scale them quickly through the public service boards? And that, I think, if we can get those two coming together quickly in the next year, that I think can mitigate some of the more traumatic impacts from the fallout of Brexit, and that feeling that we've seen expressed and again, both in the recent election but also in the 2016 referendum, that people feel the economy is not working for them.
We carry quite a lot of business barometers, and the message seems to be quite consistent that the Welsh economy is very resilient. A lot of them seem to indicate that because we're maybe not attracting the big projects, the big businesses, if you like, that employ lots of people, what we are doing is creating lots of smaller businesses, and that SME market has become very strong. It trades with each other, and in a sense has become resilient. Do you see more of that happening over the next few years?
There are lots of positives. There are lots of good people doing great things right across Wales, and the Welsh government has done there's done a lot of successful interventions. But I probably should be here doing the PR piece for that. I'm not. I'm focusing on what we need to do to fill in the gaps, and those. How do we help, as I say, those SMEs, those grounded firms, to grow stronger? Now, we have a very strong package of support available through Business Wales for fast-growing firms. And if you have a target where you can reach job creation, you'll get gold-plated support from the Welsh Government and Business Wales. And I've spoken to business just the other week in Buryport, to my constituencies, going through the Accelerated Growth Programme now, and they were full of praise for it. What I think we need to do more of is the firms that fall in those gaps, that may not be fast growing, they may be slower growing, and they want patient support, and they want to grow at their own pace. So we're trialling something through the Valleys Task Force that I've been chairing on peer-to-peer support. If in Valleys businesses, so we're getting the 10 founders of Valleys businesses together with business coaches and mentors, and getting them using their own real-life problems they're currently facing to help each other work through those problems. So building up that capacity, resilience, that know-how within the valleys to try and get business growth and resilience through tackling leadership and seeing things through a different lens. So that sort of thing, I think, has got lots of promise. So now when the Business Wales contract comes to an end in 2021, because it's currently funded largely by European funding. If that European funding goes, we have a big question to face about what comes along to replace it. But that's an opportunity to reshape the way we do business support. So I've been working with a group of experts through a foundational economy advisory board on what more we can do to help fill that missing middle that's called about, that lack of a Mittelstand we have in the UK, that they have in Germany. How do we build up small firms into medium firms? When they reach medium size, how do we stop them, the incentive being for them to cash out and move away, so control moves out of Wales, even if the jobs in the short term stay within Wales? How do we make the Welsh economy, the middle size of it, more resilient in that way? And I think that there's lots of things we're doing there, which I think is exciting, which can have a real difference.
Business support in Wales is clearly very strong. A very good ecosystem is built up over the last few years to support all sorts of businesses, from startups to growing firms. You mentioned Business Wales. Are there any contingency plans in place to fill any funding gaps to keep that consistency rolling?
Well, we're working on that now. Clearly, we value what they do, and we're going to want to find funding where we can to make sure that doesn't stop. Clearly, the loss of European funding is a major challenge for us. So that's the conversation we're going to have over the next 18 months in terms of prioritising budgets of where it goes. But I think we shouldn't be doing more of the same. We shouldn't be resting on our laurels. Now is a chance to refocus what it is that we do, and we'd really value the feedback from businesses and those who are active in this field and their ideas of how we were to reshape that.
Social enterprise, big momentum at the moment, lots going on in that space in all sorts of sectors. One of the trends we're seeing is a shift towards profits being shared with that community or with those group of employees within that social enterprise. What's your own thoughts on the social enterprise model?
I think they've got a very valuable role to play. So just back to the point of, how the big challenge is, how do we stop wealth and money leaking out of an area. Because that's been, we've had this extractive economic model. That's a real challenge in Wales, I think. And I think more employee ownership, part of saying, how do you stop these businesses when they reach a certain size cashing out, so the founders, be able to release their capital and move on, which is understandable. How do we capture that in an area? So employee ownership, I think, has got a part to play there. But then social enterprise is an important part of that ecosystem too. And then, there are social enterprises come in all sorts of shape and sizes. So it's difficult to generalize. But one of the common characteristics, again, is the importance of leadership. And we've just set up with the Wales Co-op Centre and others a social enterprise leadership academy based on a Scottish model. So it's a franchise in the sense of what is now a global movement, started in Scotland, spreading around the world, where we have people in social enterprises in Wales themselves, mentoring, coaching, supporting others. And drawing on international good practice too. And that's just being kicked off now. And I think that has got lots of potential.
What's your thoughts on social enterprise within the care sector? I say this, we have a podcast which we run on Business News Wales with the Welsh Cooperative Centre regularly. And it's clear that one of the major problems within that sector is that the profits are going into the hands of shareholders and not into care itself. Any particular thoughts around that sector?
So care is a really important part of the foundational economy, and in a sense, many of the failings of our current economic model manifest themselves in the care sector. We have low wage, low skill, low value, but well-being critical. Without the care sector, our communities would unravel, and yet we've not been valuing this part. And we know we've seen now, you go to a hospital today, and you will see queues of ambulances there because A&E is rammed. And A&E is rammed because you're not getting the throughput of patients in hospitals, because the hospital beds are taken up with people who could be better off helped in the care setting. But the care setting isn't meeting the needs of the whole system. So, we're feeling the impact of that in many different ways of its failure to operate effectively at the moment. So we're, through the Foundational Economy Challenge Fund, we're funding £1 million worth of care projects, trialling different approaches and different elements of care, but helping smaller micro firms and social enterprises is one of the trials that we're doing. So there's a lot of interesting work going on. The big challenge I'm focused on, what I don't want is some really interesting pilot projects that then fizzle out at the end of 18 months. We've seen too much of that. The hard bit, and it is hard, is how do we scale that? It is often said that best practice is a poor traveller. And that's what we've got to crack. There is some leading edge, world-leading practice in Wales. There's some brilliant people doing brilliant things. And 10 miles down the road, there's some appalling practice. And that, I think, is the nut for us to crack. We don't need to import ideas or jobs or know-how. A lot of it is here. There is genius here. It's not been properly harnessed. It's not been properly spread. And I think in the foundational economy in particular, that is true. And that's what this whole approach is all about, is trying to crack that and spread it so we capture the value locally.
Wales, of course, was the first nation in the world to commit to the climate emergency. Big opportunity for us going forward. We've got the Swansea Lagoon project. We've got many people talking about Pembrokeshire as the green capital of Europe with all the wave and wind energy projects. Same in North Wales, of course. You've got people talking about social enterprise where maybe local communities own those renewable energy supplies. What's your own thoughts on the renewables industry and the opportunities potentially for 2020?
So, I think climate emergency is just that. I think something that motivated me to come into politics. I think tackling it is an urgent priority, and that does involve some trade-offs that we need to confront between short-term and long-term choices. And we've seen that through the decision on the M4, where First Minister used a lot of courage, I think, to face down a lot of noise in the short term about fixing an immediate problem, which would have caused us more problems in the long term. So I think there's an appetite in the Welsh Government to do the right thing on this agenda. Again, pace and scale is the challenge. The UN tells us we've got 11 years to avoid runaway, irreversible climate change, which will have, top of all the other social fallouts, has a huge economic impact too. The Stern reports from 15 years ago said that looking at a 5% drop in GDP per year if we miss our temperature targets on global warming, and we're already seeing some of that from flooding and adverse weather in the short term, which is climate driven. So it's it is a business priority, and it's a government focus too. And there are opportunities in it as well as threats, as you identify. So there's a lot going on. So you mentioned there Pembrokeshire, so the Swansea Bay City deal that we're funding and supporting has in Pembroke Dock Marine an interesting project on that. We're supporting Morlais and others in North Wales. First Minister in particular is very interested in marine and wave technology as a potential. Community energy is something again that we've got an emphasis on. Before I came into politics, my last job was running a small think tank called the Institute for Welsh Affairs, and I set up a project before I left, which is now reported, a very good report if your listeners haven't read it, on how do we make Wales 100% dependent on renewable energy. And an exporter of green energy is a huge economic opportunity as well as a social necessity to address this. So there are lots of opportunities. But as I say, the big challenge for all of us, and this is not just a government challenge, is can we move quick enough to look beyond the short term and see the way we need to change as a society?
One of the main problems for the renewable market is the grid itself, I guess, converting that natural energy actually directly into the grid. Do you see any solutions in this space in the short term?
Well, battery, clearly, because the grid is privatised. The grid is built on a very old-fashioned command and control model, centralised energy production and distribution. And that era is shifting away from us. But as a private company, their incentives for acting in this space are constrained. So we have the situation now where we couldn't put mass electric charging points through mid-Wales, for example, because the grid couldn't cope with it. So, the grid is a major challenge for us all. And we need to move, as often been said, into a more decentralized, local, distributed energy system. And battery has clearly got a very important part of that. So how do we store the energy that we're creating through renewables? And there is, again, there's some work going on in universities and in companies in Wales on that. And that's the thing that we need to crack.
Final question, Lee. What does 2020 have in store for Lee Waters?
Well, I've been a minister a year as of this week. And we've got an election in 18 months' time. So I'm very focused on making the most of the opportunity I've got to do things. And I'm not thinking beyond that, really. So I've got half a dozen priorities of things that I'm trying to drive through government and make change happen. And that's what's consuming my energy. I'm a runner at wall type person. And it's not always the best approach, but that's my instinct, because there's lots of opportunities. There are a number of constraints, but we have to absolutely throw everything we can at these, because as we started off this discussion, we're living in perilous times, and the reason I came into politics was to help families like my own and those I grew up in, who didn't have lots of naturally given opportunities, to overcome unfairness and to reach their potential. And I think leadership has a huge role to play in opening up those opportunities. And that's why I'm doing this job, and that's what I'm focused on.
Lee, thanks for joining us today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.